All of my students want to play fast, and I get it, because playing fast is fun and is cool. When it comes to speed and chops, the things that usually hold us back are our technique falling apart, how well our muscle memory is tuned for executing the motion, and most importantly, not starting out with the right technique foundation. You will be able to play faster if you implement all aspects of technique in this video. This doesn't work with just one or two of the concepts, it's all of them put together. Technique changes with speed. We have to know what we do when we play faster. I will walk you through all the techniques we need and how to master them with exercises as efficiently as possible. But first, know that you have to be honest with yourself about where you are with technique. Practice in front of a mirror, record yourself in slow motion, and critique. Realize what's holding you back is all internal. So let's start with our foundation and we'll work our way up. I have a whole video about the ins and outs of technique and mechanics. You can watch that video right here. But in this video, I am going to cover some of the more important aspects that we need to know for this. When we grab the stick, we need to have a relaxed grip with maximum contact. Tension is a natural response of trying to play faster, and all it will do is stop you. Speed requires less work. Full contact means full control. It also means maximum resonance. Most of the time, the stick needs to come in contact with the drum at full velocity, even at quieter volumes. Velocity lets the stick do what it needs to do for us to achieve anything. A good fulcrum is also vital. Fulcrum is like the pivot point of the stick, and that pivot point needs to be set up on the bounce point of the stick for it to be used to its full potential. So when we're grabbing the stick, the front fulcrum is going to be around 1/3 of the way up the stick. The pad of our thumb and our index finger need to be right across from each other, even if we're not using our front fulcrum. If we're using our middle or back fulcrum, this still needs to be here. You can let your index finger relax and fall off the stick, but it still needs to be directly across from your thumb. Without your thumb and your fingers in the right position, like if your thumb is going up too high, too low, or falling off the stick, you can't properly control downstrokes, and you'll find yourself trying to fix problems while you're playing that can be solved with just having your thumb on the stick. We also need to make sure our back fingers stay on the stick, even when we're using them or opening up our hand. We don't want our pinky to be flying off every time we're doing anything a little faster, and we don't want the stick to be rotating sideways in our hand where we're just using our fingertips on it. We need to have as much skin contact as we can. All right, so when our hands aren't playing, try to keep them down. Just make sure they're relaxed. Now for the types of fulcrums that we use in our hand, we have our front fulcrum, which is the thumb and index finger, the wobbly pencil kind of thing, and we can use all of our back fingers to control the stick from there. We have our middle finger fulcrum, which is what I like to use the most instead of the front fulcrum, which is kind of the same thing, just our contact point is more between our middle finger and our thumb. Then we have the back fulcrum, which consists of mostly our back fingers controlling the stick for wrist strokes. Speaking of wrist strokes, let's talk about how we do those. We want to think of the beat of the stick moving first, which will then move the rest of the stick and then move our wrist. So make sure when we're playing specifically wrist strokes that we're cranking our wrist up, activating those muscles. And again, for this, I like to think mostly my back fulcrum. Finger strokes use our wrist a little bit, but they also use our fingers to kind of dribble the stick upside down. This is for when we're playing more intricate things at faster tempos, when our wrists don't have time to activate for everything we're doing. I use the middle fulcrum for this and control the stick with my back fingers. We need to get momentum from our wrist, and then from there, we can just use our fingers to bounce the stick. To practice them properly, do it really slow. Even though we would usually be using our wrist strokes for a slow tempo, practice your finger strokes slow so you can get the movement down and feel the stick on all your fingers. We don't want to be taking our fingers off the stick and slapping it. Keep your fingers on the stick and just go with it. Influence the movement of the stick. Now let's talk about a very important stroke that we need for playing very fast. The whip stroke, otherwise known as Moeller. I'm going to explain this one more in depth because I see a lot of people try too hard with an approach that is kind of holding them back from actually using it properly. So at this one, the movement comes from our forearm, not our wrists and not our fingers. And we need to keep our hand completely limp and relaxed, like this. Barely holding the stick, only enough for it not to fall out. This is about how fast we move our forearm. So when I move my forearm up, it takes my hand and the stick with it. Then when I move my forearm down very quickly, it preps my wrist and the stick on its own. So as it moves down, because of physics, I'm not having to use any muscles in my wrist to get the prep for the note I'm about to play. Once the motion gets towards the end in my forearm, the stick and my wrist will go down and hit the drum. Literally think about how a whip works. It's the same thing. When your stick hits the drum, don't do anything. Keep your wrists limp. Don't try to control anything as soon as it hits the drum. If you're trying to stop the stick, just let the stick touch the back of your hand. That's all we need to stop it. We don't need to squeeze. We don't need to try to control anything. Just let your whole wrist and fingers go limp. So try doing a few single whip strokes and then stop the stick and just try to feel it vibrate in your hand to know that you're not squeezing or anything. One of my old teachers in high school told me about the whole puppy paw thing. So think of a sleepy puppy that's been running around all day. They have those really big puppy paws, and you can pick up their arm and and just drop it. That's what Moeller is. That's all we're doing. So like I said, the stick will stop if the back of it touches your hand. So when we're creating more than one note with this, we're going to mostly use middle finger fulcrum, let our index finger just relax off the stick, and we're going to open up our hand a little bit so the stick can breathe and move around on its own. So just like you were trying one stroke at Moeller, try getting 2 strokes out of it. Go slow at first so you feel the motion, and then try to speed it up once you have that perfect. So that second note being produced by this is completely on its own. I'm not using my fingers, I'm not using my wrist, it's just happening. You just have to let it happen. Just make sure that you think straight up and down with your wrist. Think of like paint the fence, Karate Kid. Try not to go out with your arm when you're doing this or any other angle. And we can use this for more than 2 notes. Just let the stick play 3 notes. You let your hand relax, let the stick breathe, it'll come out on its own. It might take time to get used to this, so again, do it slow, keep trying, stay relaxed, don't influence the motion at all. When we go beyond 3 notes, like 4, 5, that's where we will have to use our finger control a little bit just to influence the movement of the stick. Still not really trying at all, just influencing the motion a little bit, keeping it going. It's easier if you don't think about it. Remember, what you have to do at a fast tempo, do at a slow tempo. That's how you really get the muscle memory and figure it out. And then for diddles like this, we also have kind of a forearm pump motion. So the way the forearm pump works is similar to how Moeller works, but not quite. So we're still letting the stick bounce freely in our hand inside of our fulcrum. We keep our wrist in place and we do all the movement from our forearm, which will make the stick bounce twice in our hand if we let it. So when you're playing diddles with a forearm pump, don't try too hard. Just make sure you're using velocity on your first stroke and then keeping your hand relaxed to let a second note come out. We're just taking away the responsibility of our wrist and moving it to our forearm so that we don't have to strain our wrist too much at these faster tempos. For example, I'll play a double stroke roll slow, fast, slow, so you can kind of see the gradient of when I start changing my techniques. So beyond how we hold and control the stick, there are other aspects of technique that can't be skipped for playing faster. Like dynamics are also very important for speed. At fast tempos, we can't play everything super high or loud. We have to maximize what we can do at every dynamic or stick height. I have a whole video about dynamics and how to work on them, which you can click right here. So I'm not gonna go super in depth about dynamics right now. It'd be a very long video, but just know when you're practicing your exercises, you have to rep them at all dynamics. Drummers have a problem with practicing everything on the pad like this, which doesn't translate to the drum set at all. Like, we're barely ever playing that loud. Play quiet, play loud, play at everything in between. And we need to train our muscle memory to do whatever we're trying to do at whatever height or volume that we need to. Okay, now let's get into stroke types a little bit. I do have a whole video on stroke types, which you should watch because it gives you exercises and it's really in depth, but I am gonna cover them a bit in this video. So we need to master our stroke types so that we have a proper response after every note that will set us up for whatever the next note's gonna be. If we're not playing our stroke types well, we're gonna freeze up and it's not gonna be possible to play fast. So really quickly, we have full strokes, which are the most important ones to really get because they're rebound strokes. Your stick starts and stops in the same spot. We use maximum velocity on the way down, and our stick should come back up where it was at the same speed because our hand is relaxed. You want to focus on just the downward motion. Don't think up. We're not lifting up our stick, we're letting the stick come up on its own. Again, the back of the stick touching your palm is what stops it, so don't let that happen. Keep your hand open and breathing. Downstrokes are also very important, and it's what stops a lot of my students at first for playing faster. Downstrokes start up and they end down. They set us up for playing quiet notes after loud notes. How do we stop the stick, you might ask? Do we squeeze? No, we don't. Think of just not letting the stick come back up. And we do that not by squeezing or changing anything in our hand, just letting the stick touch our palm. If we do anything beyond that, we're destroying our chance to play anything after it. Upstrokes are kind of weird. The stick starts down and ends up. They set us up for playing loud notes after quiet notes. All we do is use full velocity at a low dynamic and then naturally follow the stick's rebound and direction up to where it needs to be for the next note. It requires a relaxed wrist that's ready to follow the motion of the stick, not the other way around. Taps are just full strokes at a lower volume. Make sure you're keeping the rotation of your wrist really low and not letting it creep up as the tempo increases. Again, I have a whole video about this that has a lot of exercises for the pad and the drum set to develop it. But for now, what we want to practice is just full down tap up. So we have a full stroke, downstroke, tap, upstroke. But just think 2 accents, 2 taps. If you're keeping your taps low and there's contrast between the accents and taps, then you're probably doing it right. Just make sure you don't try too hard in your hand. Let the strokes do all the work. Preps. What are preps? No one really talks about preps that much. Preps are just how and when our stick moves to play the note we're about to play. If our sticks aren't moving at the right time, we're doomed. In fact, when playing diddles or a roll, the preps are what usually stops us from going faster. Like, preps are kind of natural when we're playing slow, but when we speed up, we need to keep our big motion, the macro rhythm, relaxed so everything underneath it has a chance to play in time. This is especially apparent on drum set when we're moving to different drums. Things can fall apart or you can't play fast if you're not ready to play the drum you're about to play. So there's exercises we're going to use for preps at the exercise part of this video, but here's just a sample of how we can work on preps on the pad and the drum set with the same style. For that, all I'm thinking is just... That's the overarching skeleton underneath all these diddles. Let's move on to our muscle development. We have to know when we transfer from one approach to another, from going slow to fast. Depending on what we're playing, there's kind of a gradient of techniques that we use along the way. For example, most things at a slow tempo, we're using wrist strokes. A medium tempo, we start using wrist strokes with a little bit of finger support. As we go a little bit farther than that, we're using more fingers than wrist. Then we start using either the forearm pump or Moeller and whip, things like that. Using these correctly takes repetition at slow tempos. So working on our faster techniques at a slower tempo, where we would usually use our slower techniques, is the way to master these faster techniques, so when we actually bump the tempo up, we know exactly what we're doing. It's muscle memory. Don't bump the tempo up just because you can. You need the repetitions to train your body and mind so we can effortlessly create music. Don't practice at uncomfortable tempos just to push yourself, because you will build bad habits. Progress your way up slowly. It'll become easy, faster than you think it will. I can't stress enough how important repetition is. So before we get to the exercises, the last thing to talk about is knowing what we're playing. A big part of playing fast figures is knowing them inside and out. This means memorizing combinations so well that you can string things together without ever having to think about it. It's like pulling it out of thin air. Think of how we talk. Like right now, I'm like loosely following a script, but usually when I talk day to day, I'm not planning what I'm saying before I'm saying it. I have some sort of idea and then it just comes out however I choose to say it. Just like our understanding of the language we speak, we want to develop the same understanding of the language of rhythm. How do we get good at this? Well, you can use things like stick control for different hand combinations. You can use rudiments stringing them together with accents and taps to build phrases, but you can also transcribe. Transcribing is like the most powerful tool for learning new vocabulary. Just like when you were a kid learning how to speak, you weren't using like Rosetta Stone, you're just listening to people talk around you and learning it from there. We can do the same thing with music. Another aspect of this is timing. Like, this video is already too long. I'm not going to go into timing right now. I'm going to make more videos about it. But right now you can watch my triple double video. That's really good for timing. And I also have a 16th 3-note video that's good for timing as well. Okay, so here's some exercises we're going to use for all these concepts. All these exercises are available for free on my website. You can click the link in the description. It'll take you right to them. So first, we have a stock stick control exercise inspired by the book Stick Control. This one at slower tempos is all about maximizing your full stroke, working with the rebound, and flowing through your preps. As we go faster, we're going to need some help from our fingers. And with this exercise, as we go even faster than that, we end up using almost every technique that we've learned in this video. Also, I have a whole video about stick control concepts and how to use them on the drum set. I'm going to move to a little bit faster tempo where I'm using my wrists and my fingers. Now I'm going to move to an even faster tempo where I have to use my wrist, fingers, and arm to get everything to happen the right way. Notice how my stick height's going to go down a little bit. It's to the point where we don't have enough time for our sticks to go as high. And with all these exercises, as we bump up faster and faster and faster, progressively go from less wrist, less fingers, and more just arm and physics taking care of everything. The next exercise is for developing our diddles, called Hugga, Dugga, Burr. Again, as we're going through the gradient of tempos for this, we're going to start with stroking things out with free strokes and our wrist. Then we move to a little bit of finger support from the wrist. Then eventually we're using our forearms to pump everything. My sticks are always moving at the same rate. The only thing that changes is the approach of my technique in my hands. If you want to fully develop your doubles and also master drum set sweeps, turns out I have a video about that too. So Hugga, Dugga, Burr, working on our doubles and also focusing on the movement underneath them. Faster tempo, using wrist with our fingers. Even faster tempo, still using our wrist, but using more fingers than before. So from here to much faster tempos, there's a lot of gradient where we're using our fingers still. But now I'm gonna move to a much faster tempo where I'm gonna be using my forearm pump for the diddles. So those exercises are working on our mechanics of movement and our preps. The next exercise is going to work on the same things, but now also our stroke types. This is a basic paradiddle exercise with accents. At slower tempos, I'm using my wrist strokes and all of my stroke types. So that was using only wrist strokes. Now I'm going to start using my fingers a little bit at this faster tempo. Now I'm going to be using more finger and a little bit of my arm at this faster tempo. Now I'm going to be mostly using my arm and the Moeller technique to get these notes out at this much faster tempo. So now there's this beautiful harmony between my wrists, my fingers, and my arms doing all the work. Now at this much faster tempo, I'm going to be using mostly arm, letting the stick do all the work. At tempos like this, the only thing that we should have in mind is the accent pattern, the macro rhythm, because that's how we're moving. Don't do all these exercises today. If you really want to see the benefit, focus on each tempo, only bumping up 5 clicks at a time for a long time. Only bump up your tempo 5 clicks when you've done it 5 to 7 times perfectly with no mistakes. Because what we're trying to do is develop our technique. Practice time is important. Focus on what you're doing while you're practicing. Maybe even write down your goals and what you've accomplished each session. Practice what you're bad at more than what you're good at. And a little tip, you could practice with music. I mean, like, use a metronome, but for longer reps, use music. It's way more fun. We're in the gym. We're lifting weights. We're not starting with the heaviest weight that we can't even push up without injuring ourselves. We got to build up to it. This seems like it'll take forever, but I promise it is the fastest way to get where we're going. If you try to skip any of these processes, it's going to take you much longer if you even get there. Drumming is like 95% mental and 5% physical. We're trying to master a language and a discipline at the same time. And of course, there are millions of exercises you can use for this. And I will undoubtedly make more videos exploring these things in depth in the future. If you found this video useful, please subscribe, give me a like, and leave some comments. If you have any questions, I will answer your questions. Every week I have new videos coming out, so click the bell to stay up to date. Check the description for the links to the exercises we learned today, and also links to my website for lessons. There's also a link to my Instagram and my music. All right, thanks for watching.